In Indiana, State Senator Scott Baldwin, a Republican, of course, has introduced a bill to ban critical race theory. The problem that he has, and that many of these Republican legislators have across the country, and in fact, I would say all of them have, is that nobody's teaching critical race theory in our schools. There is literally no instruction in critical race theory. It is an obscure aspect of study in law schools, and not even in first-year law schools. But it sounds scary. It's got the word critical in it, it's got the word race in it, and it's got the word theory in it. So this conservative nutball who basically kind of took the conservative world by storm a couple of years ago with critical race theory, got it into Fox News and everything else, got everybody all whipped up about it, but they're trying to ban something that basically doesn't exist. So now this ban has morphed into an effort to ban anything that they just don't like. Like, hey, Nazis are bad. You can't teach that. You can't say that. Seriously, I'm not making this up. Indiana State Senator Scott Baldwin, this Republican, who has introduced this 32-page or 36-page piece of legislation, because you can't just say critical race theory may not be taught in Indiana schools, because it's not being taught in Indiana schools. What these white Republicans are really saying is we don't want an accurate portrayal of the racial history of America. We don't want to talk about the largest genocide in the history of the world committed by white Americans against Native Americans. We don't want to talk about arguably the largest effort to hold people in enslavement, in this case specifically as a consequence of their race, happening here in the United States and all those centuries. We don't want to talk about the true history of the Civil War. We want to hang on to this lost cause narrative that it was, southern states trying to protect their way of life. No, it wasn't. They were trying to protect slavery. They said so. Read the South Carolina secession documents. They don't want to talk about this stuff because they want to maintain white supremacy. They want to, in fact, they not just maintain, they want to double down on it. So at this hearing before the Indiana legislature about Scott Baldwin's 36-page bill, at this hearing, an Indiana history teacher, Matt Bockenfeld, stood up to speak. And he said that he could not be neutral on Nazism. This is exactly what he said. He said he's speaking again to the state senator who sponsors this legislation and all the Republicans in Indiana who almost certainly are going to pass it. He said, quote, "For example, it's the second semester of U.S. history, so we're learning about the rise of fascism and the rise of Nazism right now. And I'm just not neutral on the political ideology of fascism. We condemn it, and we condemn it in full. And I tell my students the purpose in a democracy of understanding the traits of fascism is so that we can recognize it and we can combat it. We don't stand up and say who we voted for or anything like that, but we're not neutral on Nazism. We take a stand in the classroom against it, and it matters that we do that." So Republican State Senator, Indiana State Senator Baldwin says, and I quote, "I have no problem with the education system providing instruction on the existence of these isms." He said he was citing Marxism, Nazism, fascism, or any of those isms out there. He says, "I have no problem with the education system providing instruction on the existence of those isms. I believe that we've gone too far when we take a position on those isms. We need to be impartial. I'm not sure," said the Republican State Senator, Mr. Baldwin, "I'm not sure it's right for us to determine how that child should think." And that's where I'm trying to provide the guardrails. Really? You don't think it's right that we should teach that Nazism is bad, that we should teach that to our children? I mean, this goes way beyond Bill Bennett ending civics education in schools. This is anti-civics education. In October, by the way, which raises the interesting question, who is this Republican who is promoting this legislation that is almost certain to pass the Indiana House of Representatives, or the Indiana State Senate? In October, the Indianapolis Star, the local newspaper, reported that Baldwin, this state senator who's introducing this anti-critical race theory Nazism is, we're neutral about Nazism legislation, appeared on, quote, a membership list for the Oath Keepers, a far-right anti-government militia group with connections to the January 6th Capitol insurrection, end quote. And as state senator, Baldwin sponsored a resolution on gun rights that used Oath Keeper-type language. And apparently this is not an isolated incident. In Texas, where they're trying to do the same thing, a school administrator, quote, advised teachers that if they have books about the Holocaust in their classrooms, they should also include reading materials that have opposing perspectives on the genocide that killed millions of Jews. So if you're going to teach the Holocaust, you have to also teach David Duke and Steve Scalise, who calls himself David Duke without the baggage. Are we okay with this as a nation? Are we okay with these bizarre positions, you know, being leveraged off of this panic, this moral panic that is sweeping the nation right now, or at least sweeping white people in the nation right now? The teachers are somehow making white kids feel bad because they may have to understand how black kids feel? Really? This sure looks to me like the 1950s all over again. I mean, I was a little kid in the 1950s. I have only a vague memory of it. But even my father, the Republican, hated Joe McCarthy. I mean, it was like, have you no what was the shame? That's right. Have you no shame at long last, Senator? Have you no? Well, apparently not. Apparently McCarthy had no shame, just like Ted Cruz has no shame, like Rand Paul this morning had no shame. And then on top of this, we've got this second kind of iteration of BS that's going out on this podcast, Joe Rogan's podcast. He had this quack doctor on who said that the testing and vaccination, literally testing and vaccination, are being embraced by Americans because we have been hypnotized. This is a psychosis. He said it's, quote, just like hypnosis. People literally become hypnotized and can be led anywhere. And he said this is the phenomenon that was responsible for the rise of Hitler in the 1930s. This mass psychosis. Turns out, he called it mass formation psychosis. Turns out there's literally no such thing. This guy just pulled this out of thin air. Jay Van Bovel, who is an assistant professor of psychology and neuroscience at New York University, recently co-authored a book on group identities. He says, to my knowledge, there's no evidence whatsoever for this concept of mass formation psychosis. Stephen Riker, a social psychology professor at the University of St. Andrews in the UK, wrote in an email to the Associated Press, quote, the concept has no academic credibility. The term does not appear in the American Psychological Association's Dictionary of Psychology. It's a made-up thing.